The government has started the process of phasing out live sheep exports in a move that's opposed by farmers. Joining us now is Holly Ludeman, the director of the Livestock Collective. Holly, really appreciate your time. Thank you. I understand that you're a vet, you're passionate about animal welfare. So what's your view on this in terms of whether or not this is the right decision to phase out live sheep exports, really because of concerns about the mistreatment of animals?
Well, there's been significant and fundamental changes made in the last 5 years around animal welfare outcomes, and we're providing valuable nutrition to families around the world. So I think there's really a failure to recognise those changes in this policy progressing.
Yeah, so what were those changes? Because as you referred to there was a lot of outrage several years ago. We did see some investigations showing up some pretty shocking conditions on board these ships. How has the industry actually changed since then?
The images we saw were shocking to everyone, even myself who's worked in the industry, and that wasn't the truth I knew, having travelled on board and been to the Middle East, particularly where our live sheep trade is really valuable to their food security. There's been significant changes, huge regulatory reform. We're not shipping sheep in the high-risk period in the northern summer months. We've had a significant increase in space available to livestock. They can all sit down at the same time. We have veterinarians and stock people on board. We've had changes in the minimal airflow and the ventilation auditing systems on vessels. Some vessels configurations are no longer being used. And we've had a lot of innovation and research looking at automation of environmental monitoring and some standardisation of how we collect animal welfare data. So how are the animals coping in their environment? And mortality has always been used as a key measure. And while that is an objective measure that's used by epidemiologists, we've seen that ourselves through COVID of how data is used. We're now looking at more animal welfare indicators. Are they resting? When are they standing? When are they sleeping? What's the conditions of the flooring? And all that's reported to the federal government, on a daily basis, so they can see what's happening on these voyages.
There are some pretty strong views on this. I don't need to tell you that. The RSPC says, and I'm quoting here, the trade is unfixable and inherently cruel. It says the animal welfare issues with live sheep export have been evidenced, they say, by contemporary animal welfare science. They say that's happened time and time again, and that the only way to remove those risks is to actually stop exporting sheep. The government seems to be accepting that. Have you had meetings with the government, with the Agriculture Minister about this? Are they open to reversing this decision, or do you think it is a done deal?
The ag sector is definitely standing united on this and meeting with key people to have these tough discussions. The Livestock Collective is really passionate about sharing information. We've been running vessel tours and have invited the RSPCA numerous times to come see for themselves the changes and understand the more current science and the impacts that this will have on the WA sheep industry and more broadly this whole supply chain. This is an industry that is known worldwide for setting, global standards in animal welfare. We are exporting animal welfare around the world. We are improving standards in the importing countries. It would really be disappointing for Australia to remove itself from this market. There are millions of sheep exported internationally, and there's a lot of demand for chilled and live. It's not as simple as saying we can have one or the other. They are synergistic, especially for Western Australian farmers, and it helps us manage animal welfare here in WA, where we can move sheep at certain times of year to manage land and manage animals.
And you just mentioned some of the challenges there, but what is the answer to people who say, well, the trade should just be chilled? We shouldn't export live animals on these ships halfway around the world. What are the hurdles on that front?
The reality is our importing markets and the demand will be sourced from other countries. We are forcing leakage, essentially, of that demand to another supplier. So we can stay part of the industry, and I'm passionate about seeing further improvements internationally in standardising animal welfare. or we can remove ourselves, and we're not necessarily going to increase our chilled or box meat. These countries they're demanding live for their food security, for their cultural and religious purposes, and that's their sovereign right to do so. We can do it, and Australia can do it with some of the best animal welfare standards in the world.
So, Holly, as someone who's worked in this industry for several years, what impact do you see it having on jobs, on livelihoods? And it is mainly Western Australia, I think, that we're talking about here, if the Albanese government does follow through on these plans to phase it out altogether.
It'll have a huge impact on WA, and I think the lack of security and I suppose the government's decision will, I think, push people to move away from livestock, which is, really important to WA, that we have people investing in pastures and soils and land management, and sheep in farming systems allows that. So I think it'll have more people moving to cropping, and a net decrease in, jobs and incomes, and, that rural community in the southwest, particularly of WA, which is set up. The supply chain's been servicing the Middle East for 40 years, and the wool and the meat sheep industry, and our truck drivers, our shearers, our stock people, our fodder mills will all be significantly impacted by this decision.
Yeah, so one estimate suggesting that some 3,000 jobs would go if this does happen, which is still several years away, but certainly interesting to look at the challenges and hurdles in the meantime. Holly Ludeman, really appreciate you bringing your insights to the table. Thanks so much.
Thank you.